Hi, welcome back to the TED Tech of the story of Old-Luk-Oie, the Dream God. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, but I'm probably not. Okay. Excuse the noise in the background, it's just my Baba playing her game. It's a new princess game that she really likes. There is nobody in the world who knows so many stories as Old-Luk-Oie, for who can relate them so nicely. Even in the evening, while the children are sitting at the table in their little chairs, he comes up the stairs. He comes up the stairs very softly, for he walks in his socks, and then he opens the door without the slightest noise and throws a small quantity of very fine dust in their eyes, just enough to prevent them from keeping them open, and so they do not see him. Then he creeps behind them, slowly, and blows softly upon their necks till their heads begin to droop. But Old-Luk-Oie does not wish to hurt them, for he is very fond of children, and only wants them to be quiet so that he may relate them pretty stories. And they never are quiet until they are sped in and asleep. And as soon as they are asleep, Old-Luk-Oie sits himself upon the bed. He is nicely dressed, his coat made of silk and scruff. It is impossible to say of what colour, for it changes from green to red, and from red to blue as he turns from side to side. Under each arm he carries an umbrella, one of them with pictures on the inside. He spreads over the good children, and then they dream the most beautiful stories the whole night. But the other umbrella has no pictures, and this he holds over the naughty children, so that they sleep heavily and wake in the morning without having dreamed at all. Now we shall hear how Old-Luk-Oie came every night during a whole week to a little boy named Humdrum, and what he told him. There were several stories, as there are 7 days in the week. Monday! Now pay attention, said Old-Luk-Oie in the evening while Humdrum was in bed, and I will decorate the room. Immediately all the flowers in the flower pots became large trees, with long branches reaching to the ceiling, and stretched along the wall, so that the whole room was like a greenhouse. All the branches were loaded with flowers, and each flower as beautiful and as fragrant as a rose. And had anyone tasted them, he would have found them sweeter even than jam. The fruit glittered like gold, and there were cakes so full of plums that were nearly bursting. It was incomparably beautiful. At the same time sounded dismal moans from the table drawer in which lay Humdrum's school books. What can that be now? Said Old-Luk-Oie, going to the table and pulling out the drawer. It was a slate, in such distress because of a false number in the sum that it had almost broken itself to pieces. The pencil pulled and tugged at its strings as if it was a little dog that wanted to help but could not. And then came a moan from Humdrum's copybook. Oh, it was quite terrible to hear. On each leaf stood a row of capital letters, everyone having a small letter by its side. This formed a copy. Under those were other letters, which Humdrum had written. They fancied they looked like the copy, but they were mistaken, for they were leaning on one side as they intended to fall over the pencil lines. See, this is the way you should hold yourself, said the copy. Look here, you should slope thus with a graceful curve. Oh, we are very willing to do so, but we cannot, said Humdrum's letters. We are so wretchedly made. You must be scratched out then, said Old-Luk-Oie. Oh no, they cried, and then they stood up so gracefully it was quite pleasant to look at them. Now we must give up our stories and exercise these letters, said Old-Luk-Oie. 1, 2, 1, 2. So he drilled them until they stood up gracefully and looked as beautiful as a copy would look. But after Old-Luk-Oie was gone, and Humdrum looked at them in the morning, they were wretched and awkward as ever. Tuesday! As soon as Humdrum was in bed, Old-Luk-Oie touched, with his little magic wand, all the furniture in the room, which immediately began to chatter, and each article only talked of itself. Over the chest of drawers hung a large picture in a gilt frame, representing a landscape with fine old trees, flowers in the grass, and a broad stream which flowed through the wood past several castles, far out into the wild ocean. Old-Luk-Oie touched the picture with his magic wand, and immediately the birds commenced singing. The branches of the trees rustled, and the clouds moved across the sky. casting their shadows on the landscape beneath them. Then Old-Luk-Oie lifted up little Humminger up onto the frame and placed his feet in the pitchers, just on the high grass. And there he stood with the sun shining down upon him through the branches of the trees. He ran to the water and seated himself in a little boat which lay there, and which was painted red and white. The sails glittered like silver, and 6 swans, each with a golden circuit round its neck and a bright blue star on its forehead, drew the boat past the green woods, where the wood trees talked of robbers and witches, and the flowers of beautiful little elves and fairies, whose histories the butterflies had related to them. Brilliant fish with scales like silver and gold swam after the boat, sometimes making a spring and splashing the water around them, while birds red and blue, small and great, flew after him in 2 long lines. The gnats danced around, and the cockchafers cried, "Buzz, buzz!" They all wanted to follow Humminger, and all had some story to tell him. It was a most pleasant sail. Sometimes the forest was thick and dark, sometimes like a beautiful garden, gay with sunshine and flowers. Then he passed great palaces of glass and marble, and on the balcony stood princesses, whose faces were those of little girls whose Humminger knew well, and had often played with. One of them held out her hand, in which was a heart made of sugar, more beautiful than any confectioner ever sold. As Humminger settled by, he caught one side of the sugar heart and held it fast, and the princess held fast also, so that it broke into pieces. Humminger had one piece, and the princess had the other, but Humminger's was largest. At each castle stood little princesses acting as sentinels. They presented arms and had golden swords, and made it rain plums and tin soldiers, so that they must have been real princes. Humminger continued to sail, sometimes through woods, sometimes as it was large halls, and then by large cities. At last he came to a town where his own nurse lived, who had carried him in her arms when he was a very little boy, and had always been kind to him. She nodded and beckoned to him, then sang little voices she had herself composed, and said to him, "How oft my memory turns to thee, my own Humminger ever dear, when I could watch thy tiny infant glee, or kiss away a pearly tear. 'Twas in my arms thy wisping tongue first spurred the half-remembered word. Why o'er thy tottering steps I hung, my fond protection to afford."
Sam, you want to see the kitten?
So you want to go see the kitten?
You want to see the new kitten?
Yeah, baby.
I see. They're coming up. You see the new kitten?
Why o'er thy tottering steps I hung, my fond protection to afford. Farewell, I pray the heavenly power to keep thee till thy dying hour. And all the birds sang the same tune, the flowers danced on their stems, and the old trees nodded as if Old-Luk-Oie had been telling them stories as well. Wednesday! Okay. Wednesday! How the rain did pour down. Humminger could hear it in his sleep, and when Old-Luk-Oie opened the window, the water flowed quite up to the windsill. It had the appearance of a large lake outside, and a beautiful ship lay close to the house. "Wilt thou sail with me tonight, little Humminger?" said Old-Luk-Oie. "Then we shall see foreign countries, and thou shalt return here in the morning." All in a moment there stood Humminger in his best clothes on the deck of the noble ship, and immediately the weather became fine. They sailed through the streets, round the church, on every side rolled the great white sea. They sailed till the land disappeared, and then they saw a flock of storks who had left their own country, and was travelling to warmer climates. The stork flew one behind the other, and had already been a long, long time on the wing. One of them seemed so tired that his wings could scarcely carry him. He was the last of the row, and was soon left very far behind. At length he sunk lower and lower with outstretched wings, flapping them in vain, until his feet touched the rigging of the ship, and he sailed from the sails to the deck, and he slided from the sails to the deck, and stood before them. Then a sailor boy caught him and put him in the hen-house with the fowls, the ducks, and the turkeys, while the poor stork stood quite bewildered amongst them. "Just look at that fellow," said the chickens. And the turkey cock puffed itself out as large as it could and inquired who he was, and the ducks waddled backwards, crying, "Quack, quack, quack, quack!" Then the stork told him all about the warm Africa, of the pyramids, and of the ostrich, which, like a wild horse, runs across the desert. But the ducks did not understand what he said, and quacked amongst themselves. "We are all of the same opinion, namely, that he is stupid." "Yes, be sure he is stupid," said the turkey cock, and gobbled. Gobble, gobble. Then the stork remained quite silent and thought of his home in Africa. "Those are quite handsome thin legs of yours," said the turkey cock. "What do they cost a yard?" "Quack, quack, quack," grinned the ducks, but the stork pretended not to hear. "You may as well laugh," said the turkey, "for that remark was rather witty, or perhaps it was above you. Ha ha! Is he not clever? He will be a great amusement to us while he remains here." Then he gobbled, and the ducks quacked. Gobble, gobble, quack, quack. What a terrible uproar they made, while they were having such fun among themselves. Then Hammer went to the hen house and opened the door, called to the stork. Then he hopped out on the deck. He had rested himself now, and he looked happy, and seemed as if he nodded to Hammer as if to thank him. Then he spread wings and flew away to warmer countries, while the hens clucked, the ducks quacked, and the turkey cock turned quite scarlet in the head. "Tomorrow you shall be made into soup," said Hammer to the fowls, and then he awoke and found himself lying in his little bed. It was a wonderful journey which Old-Luk-Oie had made him take this night. Thursday. "What do you think I've got here?" said Old-Luk-Oie. "Do not be frightened, and you shall see a little mouse." And then he held out his hand to him, in which lay a lovely little creature. "It has come to invite you to a wedding. 2 little mice are going to enter into the marriage state tonight. They reside under the floor of your mother's storeroom, and that must be a fine dwelling place." "But how can I get through the little mouse hole in the floor?" said Hammer. "Leave me to manage that," said Old-Luk-Oie. "I shall soon make you small enough." Then he touched Hammer with his magic wand, whereupon he became less and less, till at last he was no longer than a little finger. "Now you can borrow the dress of a tin soldier. I think it will just fit you. It looks well to wear a uniform when you go into company." "Oh, yes, certainly," said Hammer. In that moment he was dressed as neatly as the neatest of all tin soldiers. "Will you be so good as to seat yourself in the little mamma?" "Would you be so good as to seat yourself in your mamma's thimble," said the little mouse, "that I may have the pleasure of drawing you to the wedding?" "Will you really make so much trouble, young lady?" said Hammer, and in this way he rode to the mouse's wedding. First they went under the floor, and then passed through a long passage, which was scarcely high enough to allow the thimble to drive under, and the whole passage was lit up with the fluorescent light of rotten wood. "Does it not smell delicious?" said the mouse, as she drew him along. "The wall and the floor have been smeared with bacon bride. Nothing can be nicer." Bacon. As soon as they arrived at the bridal hall, on the right stood all the little lady mice, whispering and giggling, as if they were making game of each other. To the left were the gentlemen mice, stroking their whiskers with their forepaws, and in the centre of the hall could be seen the bridal pair, standing side by side in the hollow cheese rind, and kissing each other, while all eyes were upon them, for they had already been betrothed and were soon to be married. More and more friends kept arriving, till the mice were nearly treading on each other to death, for the bridal pair now stood in the doorway, and none could pass in and out. The room had been rubbed over with bacon rind, like the passage, which was all the refreshment offered to the guests. But for dessert they produced a pea, on which a mouse belonging to the bridal pair had bitten the first letters of their names. This was something quite uncommon. All of the mice said it was a very beautiful wedding, and that they had been very agreeably entertained. After this, Hammer returned home. He had certainly been in grand society, but he had been obliged to creep under a room and make himself small enough to wear the uniform of a tin soldier. "Friday, Friday, I want some Friday." Oh, I got where my edges are finished. Okay, I'll finish this page and then do the next half in a different video after I finish my delicious wedges. Friday! It is incredible how many old people there are who would be glad to have me at night, said Old-Luk-Oie, especially those who have done something wrong. Good little O, they said to me, we cannot close our eyes, and we lay awake the whole night and see all our evil deeds sitting on our beds like little imps, and sprinkling us with hot water. Will you come and drive them away, that we may have a good night's rest? And then they sigh so deeply and say, We will gladly pay you for it. Good night, old Luke. The money lies on the window. But I never do anything for gold. What shall we do tonight? Asked Hamager. I do not quite know whether you care to go to another wedding, he replied, although it's quite a different affair from the last one we saw last night. Your sister's large doll, who is dressed like a man, is called Herman, intending to marry the doll Bertha. It is also the doll's birthday, and they will receive many presents. Yes, I know that already, said Hamager. My sister always allows her dolls to keep their birthdays, or to have a wedding when they require new clothes, which has happened already 100 times, I am quite sure. Yes, so it may, but tonight is the 101st wedding, and when that has taken place, it must be the last, for therefore this is to be extremely beautiful. Oh, look! Hamager looked at the table, and there saw a little cardboard doll's house, with lights in all the windows, and drawn up before it were the tin soldiers presenting arms. The bridal pair was seated on the floor, leaning against the leg of the table, looking very thoughtful and with good reason. Then Old-Luk-Oie, dressed up in grandmother's black gown, married them. As soon as the ceremony was concluded, all the furniture in the room joined in singing a beautiful song, which had been composed by the lead pencil, and which went with the melody of a military tattoo. What merry sounds are on the wind, as marriage rites together bind, a quiet and loving pair, thought formed of a kid, yet smooth and fair. Hurrah, if the doth them blind! Hurrah, we will sing through weather proved unkind! And now came the present, but the bridal pair had nothing to eat, for love was to be their food. Shall we go to a country house or travel? Said the bridegroom. Then they consulted the swallow who had travelled so far, and the old hen in the yard who had brought up 5 broods of chicken. The swallow talked to them of warm countries, where the grapes hanged in large clusters on the vine, and the air was soft and mild, and about the mountains glowing with colours more beautiful than we could ever think of. But they have no red cabbage like we have, said the hen. I was once in the country with my chickens for a whole summer, and there was a large sandpit in which we could walk about and scratch as we like. Then we got into a garden which had grew red cabbage. Oh, how nice it was! I cannot think of anything more delicious. But one cabbage stalk is exactly like another, said the swallow, and here we often have bad weather. Yes, but we are accustomed to it, said the hen. But it's so cold here and freezes sometimes. Cold weather is good for cabbages, said hen. Besides, we do have it warm here sometimes. 4 years ago we had a summer that lasted more than 5 weeks, and it was so hot one could scarcely breathe. Then in this country we have no poisonous animals, and we are free from robbers. He must be wicked who does not consider our country the finest of all lands. He ought not to be allowed to live here. And then the hen wept very much and said, I have also travelled. I once went 12 miles into a coop, and was not pleasant travelling at all. The hen is a sensible woman, said the doll Bertha. I do not care for travelling over mountains, just to go up and come down again. No, let us go to the sandpit in front of the gate, and take a walk in the cabbage garden. And so they settled it. Actually, I might as well finish the story. Saturday! Am I to hear any more stories? Am I to hear any more stories? Said little Hamager, as soon as Old-Luk-Oie had sent him to sleep. We shall have no time this evening, said he, spreading out his prettiest umbrella over the child. Look at these Chinese. And then the whole umbrella appeared like a large china bowl, with blue trees and pointed bridges, upon which stood little Chinamen nodding their heads. We must make all the world beautiful for tomorrow morning, said Old-Luk-Oie, for it will be a holiday. It is Sunday. I must now go to the church steeple and see if the little sprites who live there have polished the bells, so they may sound sweetly. Then I must go into the fields and see if the wind had blown the dust from the grass and the leaves, and the most difficult task of all, which I have to do, is to take down all the stars and brighten them up. I have to number them first before I put them back in my apron, as also number the places in which from I take them, so they may go back into the right holes, for else they will not remain. And we should have a number of falling stars, for they will all tumble down one after the other. Nope. Hark ye, Mr. Old-Luk. Hark ye, Mr. Old-Luk-Oie, said an old portrait which hung on the wall of Hamaja's bedroom. Do you know me? I am Hamaja's great-grandfather. I thank you for telling the boy stories, but you must not confuse his ideas. The stars cannot be taken down from the sky and polished. They are spheres like our earth, which is a good thing for them. Thank you, great-grandfather, said Old-Luk-Oie. I thank you. You may be the head of the family, as no doubt you are, but I am older than you. I am an ancient heathen. The old Romans and Greeks named me the dream god. I have visited the noblest houses and continue to do so. Still, I know how to conduct myself both to high and low, and now you may tell the stories yourself. So Old-Luk-Oie walked off, taking his umbrellas with him. Ah, well, one is never to give an opinion, I suppose, grumbled the portrait, and it woke Hamaja. Sunday! Good evening, said Old-Luk-Oie. Hamaja nodded and then sprang out of bed and turned to his great-grandfather's portrait to the wall so it may not interrupt him as it done yesterday. Now, said he, you must tell me some stories about 5 green peas that lived in one pod, or of the chickseed that courted the chickweed, or of the darning needle who acted so proudly because she fancied herself an embroidery needle. You may have too much of good things, said Old-Luk-Oie. You know that I like best to show you something, so I show you my brother. He is also called Old-Luk-Oie, but he never visits anyone but once. From when he does come, he takes them away on his horse and tells them stories as they ride along. He knows only 2 stories. One of these is so wonderfully beautiful that no one in the world can imagine anything at all like it, but the other is just as ugly and frightful, so that it would be impossible to describe it. Then Old-Luk-Oie lifted Hamaja up to the window. There now, you can see my brother, the other Old-Luk-Oie. He is also called Death. You perceive he is not so bad as they represent him in picture books. There he is a skeleton, but now his coat is embroidered with silver, and he wears the splendid uniform of a hussar, and a mantle of a black velvet flies behind him over his horse. Look how he gallops along! Hamaja saw that this Old-Luk-Oie rode on. He lifted up old and young, and carried them away on his horse. Some he seated in front of him, and some behind him, but always inquired first, How stands the mark book? Good, they all answered. Yes. But let me see for myself, he replied, and they were obliged to give him the books. Then all who had very good or exceedingly good came in front of the horse and heard the beautiful story, and those who had the middling or tolerably good in their books were obliged to sit behind and listen to the frightful tale. They trembled and cried, and wanted to jump down from the horse, but they could not get free, for they had been seemed fastened to the seat. Why, Death is a most splendid Old-Luk-Oie, said Hamaja. I am not in the least afraid of him. You need have no fear of him, said Old-Luk-Oie, if you take care and keep a good conduct book. Now I call that to be very instructive, murmured the great-grandfather's portrait. It is useful sometimes to express an opinion. And so he was quite satisfied. These are some of the doings and sayings of Old-Luk-Oie. I hope he visits you himself this evening and can relate some more. The end. That was a very good book. I like how they portrayed Death in the end. How he was pretty much the same, but he only visited once. It's a very interesting one. I mean, I'm pretty sure the conduct book he talks about is pretty much their life story, about whether or not they actually did good deeds or bad deeds. I think that might have been the concept of hell and heaven with the stories. The beautiful stories about heaven and hell. I find that really interesting and beautiful. It'd be a nice way to tell children, too, about death. I mean, if you're an atheist, that's fine, but it's still a nice way to tell people, you know what, be a good person. Just be a good person. It's a nice story to end on. Bye. I'm going to go check out this little black kitten that we just got. I want to go see it.